the friend who suddenly stops replying, the employee who quits without notice the day after seeming completely fine, the partner who calmly says, "I don't love you anymore," as if it were a fact they just discovered instead of a verdict they've been quietly building for months, maybe years. We call this sudden. We call it out of nowhere. We say, "I never saw it coming." But here's the psychological truth that almost nobody wants to hear. Change is never actually sudden. It only looks sudden to the person who wasn't paying attention. Somewhere, right now, someone in your life may be reaching a quiet breaking point, and you won't know until the moment it's already too late to fix it. And somewhere in your own chest, there may be a decision you've already made, long before you're ready to admit it out loud. Stay with me, because understanding why people change without warning might be the thing that saves your next relationship, your next friendship, or even the next version of yourself. The hidden problem is as we live under a comforting illusion, that pain announces itself. That people who are struggling will obviously look like they're struggling. That love, once strong, doesn't disappear without a loud, dramatic ending. But real emotional collapse rarely comes with sirens. It comes in silence, in the missed conversation, the swallowed complaint, the sigh that gets interpreted as tiredness instead of grief. Think about it. Somewhere in your life, you have said, "I'm fine," while quietly building a case against a relationship. You have smiled through a dinner while internally already grieving. And one day, without a single scream or slammed door, you simply left. Emotionally, if not physically. If that description feels uncomfortably familiar, you already understand the truth this video is about to explain. Let's go beneath the surface of sudden change and look at what's actually happening biologically and psychologically. Psychologist Leon Festinger, in his 1957 theory of cognitive dissonance, showed that human beings cannot tolerate holding two conflicting beliefs for long. For example, "I love this person, and this person keeps hurting me." When those two beliefs collide, the brain doesn't sit in that discomfort forever. It resolves it, sometimes by changing behavior, sometimes quietly by changing belief, deciding cognition by cognition that the relationship no longer deserves the same devotion it once did. This resolution doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It happens slowly, invisibly, one small rationalization at a time, until the final "I'm done" is simply the last domino falling in a chain that started long ago. Now bring in neuroscience. Researcher Bruce McEwen coined the concept of allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear that chronic stress places on the body and brain. Every unresolved argument, every swallowed resentment, every small betrayal adds a little more weight to an invisible backpack. The body doesn't reset to zero between stressors. It stacks them, and when that backpack finally becomes too heavy, the response often isn't rage. It's shutdown, withdrawal, a sudden cold quiet that looks like a switch being flipped, when really, it's a threshold quietly being crossed. And then there's what Dr. John Gottman discovered in his decades of couples research, a phenomenon called flooding, or diffuse physiological arousal. Gottman found that once a person's heart rate rises above roughly 100 beats per minute during conflict, they become physiologically incapable of listening, empathizing, or reasoning clearly. The nervous system shifts into pure self-protection. People who repeatedly experience this flooding without relief eventually learn, on a nervous system level, to avoid the source of it altogether. Sometimes that avoidance looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like someone who changed overnight. Put simply, what looks like a switch was actually a slope. You just weren't standing close enough to see the incline. Picture a workplace. An employee named Farouk has raised concerns about his workload 3 times over the past year, each time brushed off with, "We'll look into it." He stops raising it a 4th time. His manager assumes the issue resolved itself. 6 months later, Farouk resigns with 2 weeks' notice and no warning. His manager is stunned. Farouk isn't. He'd been quietly grieving the job for months. Picture 2 childhood friends. One begins pulling away, shorter replies, canceled plans, after a joke that cut too deep and was never addressed. Neither says anything. A year later, they're strangers who occasionally like each other's photos. No fight ever happened. Just silence, compounding. Picture a marriage. A wife brings up feeling unheard, gently, 3 separate times over 2 years. Each time, her husband reassures her nothing is wrong. Then one evening, without raised voices, she says she wants a divorce. He is blindsided. She has not been surprised by this outcome for a very long time. Picture a child, growing up in a home where affection was inconsistent, warm one day, cold and distant the next. That child becomes an adult who suddenly ends relationships the moment they start to feel too good, too stable, because somewhere inside, stability itself had quietly been coded as something that couldn't be trusted to last. Every one of these stories shares a hidden signature. The change felt instant to the person watching from outside, and inevitable to the person who had been carrying it all along. Sign 1. The silent accumulation. Someone stops voicing complaints, not because things improved, but because voicing them stopped feeling worth it. Every unheard complaint becomes a small deposit into what feels like an unpayable emotional debt. Eventually, speaking up feels pointless, so silence becomes the only remaining language. This mirrors the allostatic load model. The nervous system doesn't discharge stress fully between events. It accumulates event after event until capacity is reached. Austin, the employee who raised the same concern 3 times before simply resigning without another word. By the time the silence breaks, it doesn't break as conversation. It breaks as an exit. Sign 2. The internal divorce before the external one. A person begins emotionally detaching from a relationship long before they ever announce leaving it. This is cognitive dissonance resolving itself quietly. Rather than continuing to hold "I love them" and "I am in constant pain" together, the mind slowly, protectively shifts the first belief to match the second. Festinger's research showed that when 2 cognitions conflict, humans are strongly motivated to reduce the discomfort, often by revising the less enforceable belief rather than confronting the harder truth directly. The wife who mentioned feeling unheard 3 times, then one day simply asked for a divorce, a decision that had already been emotionally finalized long before it was spoken. The partner left behind grieves a relationship that, in truth, ended long before the final conversation. They were simply the last to know. Sign 3. Physiological flooding and shutdown. A person who once engaged fully in conflict suddenly goes quiet. Distant or emotionally unreachable during disagreements. Repeated exposure to high conflict. High-stress interactions can push the nervous system past its threshold, triggering a self-protective shutdown rather than continued engagement. Gottman's flooding research found that once heart rate crosses a critical threshold during conflict, a person becomes physiologically unable to process what's being said. Communication effectively stops working at the biological level, regardless of intention. A partner who once fought passionately for the relationship now sits in silence during arguments, not out of apathy, but because their body has learned that engaging simply costs too much. The silence gets misread as not caring, when it is often the opposite. A nervous system that cared so much for so long, it finally ran out of capacity to keep reacting. Sign 4. Rationalized tolerance. Someone stays in an unhealthy dynamic far longer than seems logical, defending it to friends and even to themselves until seemingly overnight, they leave without looking back. To reduce the discomfort of staying in a painful situation, the mind builds justifications. It's not that bad. Every relationship has this. I probably provoke it. These justifications hold the dissonance together until enough new evidence breaks through them all at once. Festinger and Carl Smith's classic 1959 experiment demonstrated how people will convince themselves that an unpleasant task was actually enjoyable, simply to resolve the discomfort of having endured it. The same mechanism operates in relationships and jobs. The longer someone tolerates something, the more elaborate the self-justification becomes, until it finally collapses. A friend defends a toxic relationship for years, insisting he's not that bad, then abruptly cuts contact after one final incident that looks small to outsiders, but was simply the last brick the justification could bear. Onlookers see a sudden, disproportionate reaction. What they don't see is years of quiet, invisible structural failure underneath. Sign 5. The protective shift in identity. A once warm, agreeable person becomes guarded, distant, or unrecognizably different after repeated disappointment. Chronic relational stress doesn't just change behavior in the moment. It can gradually reshape how safe a person believes vulnerability to be, altering their baseline personality expression as a long-term adaptation. This connects to allostatic load's broader effects. Chronic stress doesn't just wear down the body. Longitudinal research links it to lasting changes in emotional regulation and baseline stress. Reactivity over time, the child, raised amid inconsistent affection who grows into an adult who ends relationships suddenly the moment things start to feel stable, because stability, to their nervous system, was never something proven safe to trust. The people around them experience aversion that feels like a stranger, not realizing that the sudden change is the finished product of years of quiet self-protection. Notice what threads through every single sign. None of these people changed overnight. What changed overnight was your awareness of what had already been happening. The complaint that went unspoken, the heart rate that quietly crept past its limit, the justification that finally ran out of room to stretch. If you feel a small chill reading this, thinking of someone who left you without warning, or a moment you yourself walked away and everyone called it so sudden, that chill is not confusion. It's recognition of a truth you always sensed but never had language for. People don't leave in a moment. They leave in 1,000 small moments nobody was watching closely enough to notice, including, sometimes, themselves. Here is what almost no one tells you. Sudden change is not proof of instability, cruelty, or coldness. It is proof of how long someone tried to hold something together before finally admitting it couldn't be held any longer. This isn't a flaw in human character. It's a universal pattern of how the nervous system and the mind handle prolonged emotional strain, quietly, then all at once. Psychology doesn't ask you to become someone who never reaches a breaking point. It asks you to stop mistaking silence for peace, in others and in yourself. The goal was never to avoid change. The goal is to notice the slope long before it becomes a cliff. Let's discuss its solutions. 1. Treat repeated small complaints as data, not noise. Since allostatic load accumulates invisibly, the second or third time someone raises the same concern, treat it as a signal worth real attention, not repetition to tune out. Ask directly. You've mentioned this before. How long has this actually been building? 2. Learn to recognize physiological flooding in real time. If your heart is racing during a difficult conversation, Gottman's research suggests taking a genuine 20-minute break, not to avoid the issue, but because your nervous system needs to return below its threshold before real listening becomes physiologically possible again. Check your own rationalizations honestly. If you notice yourself defending a situation more elaborately than it seems to deserve, "It's really not that bad," repeated often. Pause and ask whether you're describing reality or protecting yourself from an uncomfortable truth you're not ready to face. Address dissonance early, not after it resolves itself. Since unresolved conflicting beliefs eventually get settled on their own, often by quietly reducing love rather than resolving the pain, have the harder conversation early, while there's still a relationship left to repair. Watch for identity shifts in people you love. If someone you know has become noticeably more guarded, distant, or different over time, consider that this may not be who they've become, but who chronic stress has slowly shaped them into. And that gentle curiosity, not blame, is what actually starts repairing it. Maybe the most heartbreaking part of any sudden goodbye isn't the ending itself. It's realizing the story had already been written, quietly, chapter by chapter, while you were only ever watching the final page. Change in people is rarely an explosion. It's erosion, the slow, patient work of water on stone, invisible day by day, undeniable only once the shape has already been carved. So maybe the real work isn't learning to recover from sudden change. Maybe it's learning to notice the water while it's still just a trickle, in the people we love, and in the quiet, unspoken places inside ourselves where we, too, have already started to leave something behind. Nothing breaks all at once. It only finishes breaking all at once. If this video described a goodbye you never saw coming, or a decision you've already quietly made but haven't said out loud yet, you're not alone in this. Comment one word that describes what came to mind while watching this. Just one word. Let it be witnessed. If this helped you understand someone or yourself a little more clearly, share it with someone who needs to hear that they weren't imagining the signs. And if you want more psychology that helps you notice the slope before it becomes a cliff, subscribe. The next video might help you catch something in a relationship, a friendship, or yourself before it quietly finishes breaking. You still have time to notice. Use it.